You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 26th of September 2025 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, broadcasting live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Chris Turmack. Coming up on today's programme, European defence ministers meet to discuss the growing problem of drones intercepted in Europe's airspace. We'll explore whether a drone wall is a fantasy or a reality. After that,
Je dormirai en prison, mais la tête haute. Je suis innocent.
Former French President Nicolas Sarkozy there saying he will sleep in prison with his head held high after being sentenced to 5 years for criminal conspiracy. Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief Simon Bouvier brings us the reaction from France. And then we'll get a wrap of culture news with our very own Claudia Jacob here in the studio, including... a look at Basque filmmaking in the San Sebastian Film Festival. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Chris Turmack. Now, the idea of drones circling a few Danish airports disrupting travel for a few hours of a day may not seem like the most dramatic escalation of a conflict, but it has been enough for Denmark to consider invoking Article 4 of NATO's self-defense treaty for the first time in its history. Denmark has yet to accuse Russia directly of being behind the drone incursions, but defense ministers from across Europe are meeting today to discuss a response and the creation of a sort of drone wall to defend against future incursions. And I'm joined now right here in the studio by Monocle writer and Ukraine expert Julia Jen. Julia, great to have you here in the studio. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
There's still a lot of speculation about what happened yesterday, exactly where these drones came from, how coordinated it is. But what do we know 24 hours or so later about what happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me on to talk about this. One thing we know for certain is that it didn't just happen 24 hours ago. It also happened overnight as well. We had Aalborg airport also closing its airspace. We even had a German Airways passenger jet, which had taken off from Amsterdam on the way to Aalborg, and it had to turn back to Amsterdam. I think that was very frustrating for the passengers on board. So I can imagine it's for Europeans, this is kind of, but actually if you think about the safety issues as well, you've got drones, unknown drones flying around in the sky with passenger jets, civilian jets in a very, very congested airspace. That is a big security concern. And I feel quite nervous now, thinking about getting on a jet next time. But anyway, what we do know is that there was a Russian ship with its transponder off in southern Danish waters. So transponder off means it couldn't be easily tracked, but it was found there, and that is a very suspicious sign. We know that, for example, the Danish government has said there were professional actors behind this. This is a very deliberate move. Obviously, as you said, we're not blaming, no one is blaming Russia at this stage, but it really comes after a very long string of incidents of drones disrupting airspaces. We know that in the last 24 hours, there have been drones over Swedish and French military bases. So it's kind of scattered across Europe.
Not to mention things like GPS jamming and all this stuff that's been happening over the last, years now.
Absolutely. And the shadow fleet of Russian oil tankers that are kind of moving through the Baltic Sea constantly, potentially dragging their anchors. We have that sort of, cables being cut. There's just a kind of litany of sort of hybrid threats that are really affecting our society, down to kind of inconvenient details. There's flights being delayed. We know that there was that huge cyber attack a few days ago, also delaying flights all over Europe from the west to the east. But I think also, one important development to really focus on is the Danish Ministry of Transport has actually put in a law that hopefully will pass this autumn, which will actually allow the Danish military to, so ports and airports, to actually neutralise drones. So that's a step forward, I think, in terms of protecting infrastructure in Denmark. And, potentially we'll see other countries taking the lead on that too.
Well, it is interesting to speak of other countries. I mean, perhaps the Baltics, Poland have been used to this to some degree over the last, many months, even years, different versions of this hybrid warfare, as you call it. The fact that now, or I guess maybe Denmark, other countries are waking up to this reality, What do you expect to come from today, then, European defence ministers meeting to discuss a response to this, particularly this idea of a drone wall? What does that even look like?
Yeah, absolutely. A drone wall, I don't think we'll see it being kind of rolled out in like terms of, when you hear that sort of image, you kind of imagine like buzzing drones sort of blocking out like a literal border wall.
I feel like there's a film with that somewhere.
Absolutely. It's so sci-fi. But I think what we're talking about here really is identifying drones or objects that are travelling towards European airspace. So you can see them before they arrive. We know that, for example, when the Polish drone incursion happened, we know that the Ukrainian Air Force and we know that Ukrainian kind of civilian volunteers, etc., were communicating with their Polish colleagues and telling them there are drones on the way to your airspace. We don't know if they will stop in Ukraine and strike something here or if we'll be able to neutralise them, but they're on their way. So what a drone wall would do would actually formalise that and put that all across NATO's eastern flank. So from Finland all the way down across the Baltic states to Poland, Romania, which has unfortunately suffered a lot of these sort of incursions as well, and really bring that in. And then, okay, so the drone is coming towards you, an object or multiple objects are coming towards you. Then there are jammers. So if they are on sort of GPS or if they're on kind of SIM card use, then you would jam them. There would also be counter drones, so being able to actually shoot them down to neutralise them to make sure that they don't actually even enter your airspace, or as they enter your airspace, you neutralise them. But also one thing I think that Europeans are going to be thinking about is actually nets, fishing nets, nets that volunteers can make, because a lot of drones, Russian drones that operate now in Ukraine are fibre optic. That means they don't operate on GPS. That means they're not talking to a satellite. So you can't actually jam them. So they're literally connected to the drone with a piece of string with a fibre optic cable inside. And so they're unspooling this, literally kind of being sent out with it. It's kind of almost like a fishing rod or something with a drone attached on the other end. And it's being sent out into the air. And the only way that you can actually stop these drones is with a literal net. So I think, honestly, there will be so many solutions, I think, offered, but simple things down to like that to really kind of address all the issues. And fibre optic drones are very difficult to deal with because you literally can't jam them. You have to just use these nets. It's very mundane solutions like that.
A wall is going to look like many different things.
Yes.
One other aspect, Julia, we wanted to talk about is that Poland is actually amending its own laws to potentially shoot down Russian objects also over Ukraine. Where does this come from?
So this has been really pushed by the foreign minister, Radosław Sikorski, who's been talking about this for a long time. And this was something that Ukrainians have been really pushing for a long time as well. It's creating a no-fly zone over Western Ukraine. We know that there are lots of issues with the idea, and people have a lot of analysts have actually been saying there have been lots of issues about do we shoot down a Russian plane, a Russian drone, whatever, because European airspace is so highly congested with so many civilian flights, not to mention cargo planes, military flights, etc., that actually the escalation would be very dangerous. And perhaps there are other ways to kind of focus on, using Russian frozen assets to really push back against Russia, against their incursions. But actually this no-fly zone over Western Ukraine would be a very simple way to make sure, the skies over Ukraine are clear from civilian and cargo planes, etc. There are just jets, military jets, operating that airspace as well as drones. So that's an open airspace that you can use, and Poland have been pushing to be able to go in there with Ukrainian squads on the ground and to actually neutralise threats as they're approaching NATO territory with the Ukrainians. Ukrainians are very keen on this, of course, because it helps them. They can already neutralise threats, 85 to 90% of threats, and they've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of threats a day. But Ukrainians, of course, would be grateful for the extra help. And what it would be really useful for is NATO as well actually getting hands-on experience dealing with these really pesky threats, really difficult threats. Governments all over the world are dealing with this. South Koreans are dealing with this. You've got this across Asia all the way to America as well. Unidentified drones, tiny little targets. How do you deal with them? And NATO getting that hands-on experience as well through Poland being present on Ukrainian soil, I think is something very keen that people are keen to kind of get there to get that experience. Yes.
Well, just finally, Julia, before we let you go, it is also UN General Assembly week, and there's been lots of different leaders speaking, including, of course, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. And now we've also heard from Poland's President, Karol Nawrocki. What do you make of his speech? A lot has been made of the idea that he said he agreed with Donald Trump, kind of leaned into the culture wars, but as a Ukrainian as well, what was your impression of the message he sent?
Yeah, it's interesting. We were talking about this before in the studio, before we came on air. Actually, I think that he really showed how united the Polish position is. He talked about Russia's colonial war. So Russia using other countries that are surrounding it, not just in Eastern Europe, but also all the way looking into Japan, where they have had a lot of airspace incursions as well and lots of aggressive moves towards the Japanese. They treat other countries as possessions, and they treat starting a war as a historical correction course. He used this language, very academic language, very kind of almost left-wing language, sort of activist language, talking about colonialism, talking about imperialism, talking about, agency of different countries. So even though, of course, he was agreeing on domestic issues, so we're talking about things like abortion or migration, etc., really agreeing with Trump there and putting himself in kind of Orban's Trump, camp, sorry. But actually, when it came to foreign policy and when it came to actually deciding the future of Europe, he really was very much on the kind of central to left-wing side of things. Centre-left sort of side of things, if we're looking at foreign policy, which is, I think, quite fundamentally important for Europe.
Interesting to see this divide in Poland between domestic and foreign policy. Thank you very much, Julia. That was Monocle writer and Ukraine expert Julia Jen. Now here's Laura Kramer with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Chris. President Trump says he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank, declaring it's not going to happen. His remarks push back against growing calls in Israel's parliament for full annexation of Palestinian land. South Korea has fired warning shots after a North Korean vessel crossed a disputed sea border. The ship sailed several kilometers south of the line before retreating. This is the first such clash in 3 years, and North Korea has not responded. And Norwegian Air has ordered 30 more Boeing 737 MAX planes, bringing its total to 80. The airline says deliveries will run through 2031. It calls the deal key to both expansion and greener flying. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Chris.
Thanks very much, Laura. Now, when Libya's former leader, Muammar Gaddafi, appeared in Paris in 2007, pitching his then famous Bedouin tent in the garden of the Hôtel de Marigny, it was a seminal moment in global politics, sort of welcoming back of the Libyan dictator into the international community. But now the former French president who invited him, Nicolas Sarkozy, has been sentenced to 5 years in prison for a criminal conspiracy that involved a pact with Gaddafi to fund his 2007 presidential campaign in exchange for rehabilitating Gaddafi's image. Well, joining us now from Paris is Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris bureau chief. Simon, good to have you back on the show. I'm sorry to say it does feel like we only speak about crises in French politics these days. This one is the first time that a French head of state could be sent to prison. Where does this rank?
Well, Chris, one person's crisis is another person's sigh of relief that institutions are functioning properly and independently. So it really depends which newspaper you're reading, as is often the case here in France, actually, to see what the take is. I think on the right side of the political spectrum, there is widespread consternation that jailing former President Sarkozy is a sign that the kind of desacralization of the presidency is nearing its final stages, and that is only likely to exacerbate public discontent with politicians who think that they're above the law. But then if you look on the other side of the political spectrum, I think there is quite a bit of rejoicing that, institutions work, and even if you're the president, you're not above the law.
And what recourse, if any, does Sarkozy have at this point? Is he going to continue challenging this? Is there any expectation that he can escape?
Well, he has already said that he's going to appeal. He maintains that he's innocent. He maintains also that the severity of the sentence is proof that this is about hatred and about persecuting him politically rather than serving justice. But let's remember that even though this is guaranteed to be the first time that a former French president sees the inside of a prison cell. This is not the first time that Nicolas Sarkozy has been sentenced to a prison sentence. He did serve a previous sentence for 3 years in prison under house arrest, 1 year under house arrest and 2 years suspended sentence. So I think that precedent or that previous ruling definitely did not play in his favor. But what will happen now is that on October 13th, he's going to meet with prosecutors who will essentially lay out for him the details of where and when he's going to be incarcerated. And then as soon as he is, he can request to serve his prison sentence, not in jail, but at his home. He is over 70 years old, so he can request that immediately. He is almost guaranteed to do that. So it's not clear how long he will stay in prison, but he's definitely going. So the symbolism of that is, of course, very important.
Simon, as you say, this is not the first time he has received a sentence, but nonetheless, this is an even bigger one. Take us back to 2007, just briefly, if you could, because I do remember Gaddafi's extraordinary visit to Paris. That's what makes this case so fascinating as well. How was that visit by Gaddafi at the time kind of covered in France?
Well, as you mentioned, Chris, I think it was considered. I think a good parallel would be Vladimir Putin's visit to Alaska recently. It was considered the kind of against the grain legitimization of somebody who had been ostracized from the international community because of his government's role in orchestrating terrorist attacks. And so people were puzzled. They were wondering whether it was a masterstroke to try and bring him on side in the fight against global terrorism, or if it was a mistake to give legitimacy to somebody who had supported terror. And I think even though prosecutors were not able to prove that there was a quid pro quo, they weren't even really able to prove that cash actually changed hands. They were able to prove that there was a scheme to try and get illegal campaign money from the Libyan regime, and that they got organized to make it happen, and that Sarkozy couldn't not have been aware of it, since the person handling it was his chief of staff and his closest friend, and therefore he is part of this criminal conspiracy, whether or not they were successful in actually funneling Libyan cash into the campaign. And so what's interesting also, Chris, last element here, is that these whole allegations of Libyan financing of his campaign surfaced after the Western intervention in Libya, which was spearheaded by Sarkozy, actually, in 2011, because one of Gaddafi's sons went public saying, we gave you money for your campaign, give it back. And so that's what kicked all of this off, and that is what allows Sarkozy also to claim that this is about revenge, it's not about justice.
Imagine he couldn't trust Gaddafi's family. One other aspect of this, you did discuss there, Simon, the fact that this is being covered differently depending on which newspaper you read, but how does this generally impact trust in the French establishment at this point? French politics is in some degree of turmoil. Can you draw a line from Sarkozy all the way to now? He is still somehow at the center of French politics. He was consulting with the current prime minister.
Yes, and I think he has been known to meet and chat with the current president. There's even, some speculation in the media now about, is President Macron going to intervene to pardon him, to spare him a jail sentence? I think that is highly unlikely. But I think it is going to, give ammunition to people who say that the political class behaves in a way that is not consistent with what the law is, and that there's a double standard, or that they think there is, between who the law applies to, and they don't include themselves in that category. I think this case is definitely going to lead to broad generalizations about politicians in general. But in my opinion, it is more important for the law to be applied regardless of political consequences. I don't think it's a judge's job to consider that. I think as the judge in this case did, it's their job to say, this is the law, these are the circumstances, this is the evidence, and this is the sentence that we think is appropriate.
Just finally, Simon, before we let you go, Monocle's new magazine for October is out, and perhaps you could give us a little teaser from your end. You spoke to the producer of board games.
Absolutely. I visited the headquarters of a company called Asmodee, which is a board game publisher that recently became a publicly traded company. It is now valued at close to $30 billion. And so I met with their CEO to discuss what the business model of a board game publisher is and where the kind of next frontier in board games is. And we had a really fascinating conversation that went from how they rely on this network of passionate hobby stores where sales advisors really kind of prescribe the appropriate board games for the need of every customer and have this encyclopedic knowledge of what games are more suitable for whom, all the way to distributing the best-selling hits in big retail stores, and also what the hottest trends in this kind of booming industry are. France is the first market in Europe for board games, and so little teaser: intellectual properties and trading card games are the big game in town at the moment. So take a read.
Do check that out. Simon Bouvier, Monocle's Paris Bureau Chief, thank you very much for joining us. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. You are back with The Briefing on Monocle Radio. I'm Chris Chermak, and it is time now for a culture wrap, for which we're joined right here in the studio by Claudia Jacob, Monocle writer. Claudia, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon.
We are sticking with the magazine theme because how can we not? We love a little bit of an in-house plug here at Monocle, and the October issue is out. You have also contributed to this, and I kind of love the title just of this what you're going to bring us that you've written, the Belgian bike brand that is resisting Chinese imports.
That's right. I think they're one of the few, if not the only, European bike brand that is actually making their bikes entirely from European parts. It's a rarity these days, and
it's sort of a decision you have to make very clearly at this point.
Definitely. I talked to the founder. I mean, it's a family-owned company. They're based in Pittem in Belgium, and it was started by his grandfather. And he kind of talked about how when they started in 1946, there were about 250 companies in Europe who were doing the same as them, manufacturing frames for bikes. And by 2000, there were only 4. So you can see how the effect of cheaper imports from largely from China, but also from Asia more generally, affected bike production in Europe. And they were a really fascinating example of one that's managed to successfully maintain a stand.
What did they say? So they're called Achiel, is that right?
That's
is that the name? What did they say is their secret? How are they one of the 4 that's still standing?
So they kind of explained how manufacturing frames, exclusively frames, became too expensive. It's quite labour intensive. It takes too long. And so what they did is they pivoted and they decided, actually, instead of us just making frames and giving them to manufacturers, what we're going to do is we're going to call in sort of parts from all over Europe, which reduces the carbon footprint of transporting. So you sort of cut out that Asian side of things. And so they've essentially taken the best parts of things. So, they've taken, German tyres and they've taken English leather saddles, and they're sort of combining them into sort of the best bike they can make. And they also explained how actually people are much more willing to spend more money on bikes nowadays. I mean, commutes using the bike are much more popular. I think about 50% of people in the UK commute using a bike. So actually people are prepared to spend a bit more money on it, and they're tapping into that market.
I am one of those people who commutes by bike, so I can
Good for you.
definitely see that. Another story we wanted to focus on, Claudia, this has been getting some traction. Bolzano in Italy is proposing a dog tax. I don't know if this might be a first, but it's for owners and tourists, which is what I find interesting about this as well. It's not just the sort of typical over-tourism story of if you bring a dog or a person somewhere. It's owners too.
That's right. It's amazing. I think I've seen this reported in Scotland, New York, Korea. I mean, I've never seen a story get so much traction. Yeah, they absolutely love it. But no, I think it really shows how much pride South Tyrol takes in its surroundings. I mean, it's one of the most beautiful, elegant provinces in Italy and the Dolomites, and is incredibly popular in recent years. And so, yeah, they're suggesting this daily tax of €1.50 for tourists. And yes, as you say, locals are not excluded. That's going to be €100 per dog if you live in Bolzano.
Per year?
Per year, exactly. So, yeah.
And this is for street cleaning. And to be honest, I have to say I'm somewhat on the side of this one. I don't know if that's controversial or not. But, you know, I guess it depends where you live. I don't know what Bolzano is like. I do remember a place like Berlin, for example. People were not very good at cleaning up after their dogs. So I would have really supported a dog tax there for street cleaning.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, Bolzano is quite a special place because it's, you know, it's in Italy, but it actually feels much more Germanic. It's sort of essentially toes that line between Italy and Austria. It's a really interesting place. So I can't say I'm entirely surprised. It does feel like quite a sort of Swiss Germanic thing to introduce. And I don't think it's a bad idea. I mean, it's to offset the cost of street cleaning. And I think it's also meant to sort of target dog owners as opposed to, you know, making locals who don't have dogs also cover the cost, which, you know, sounds quite straightforward and sensible to me.
Reasonable. Bring it everywhere. There we go. We agree. Finally, Claudia, we did want to look at a film festival. This is the San Sebastian Film Festival. What's been happening there? Yeah,
it wraps up tomorrow. I was actually there last September, so I got to experience a bit of the sort of excitement that builds around the San Sebastian Film Festival. It's the 73rd edition, and for me it's a really interesting one because I don't think we typically associate San Sebastian as, you know, with film, but actually in September the city becomes this sort of global cinema hub. Due to, I mean, they have very spectacular scenery, amazing food, you know, that sort of thing we're not surprised about, but actually the Basque Department of Culture and Linguistic Policy actually offers quite attractive subsidies, like tax subsidies for films shot in the Basque language, as well as those shot on Basque soil. And it's a way of kind of keeping the Basque language alive. Euskera is the Basque local language. It's a minority language, one of the oldest languages in Europe. And actually 20% of those awarded were filmed, of the films were in Euskera, the Basque language. And yeah, I think Spain are great at trying to maintain their local dialects and their local languages. And it's interesting to see it being carried across a global film festival.
What was it like being there last year? What do you remember? What was the mood?
It was super buzzy, you know, people had come, you know, not just for the food, because San Sebastian is really well known as a food hub. I think it has the highest concentration of Michelin-starred restaurants in Europe. But actually people were there for the culture. They were there for the film, and Netflix is working with quite a few Basque filmmakers on a few series there. So it's getting global recognition and actually showing that there's a bit of a shift from Catalonia, which I think traditionally has been associated with the epicenter of Spanish film, you know, the Almodóvar generation. And now we're seeing a bit of a shift to some of their smaller cities. And yeah, Northern Spain is having a bit of a moment.
So watch out for Northern Spain and even Basque filmmaking on Netflix. Coming to a streaming service near you. Claudia Jacob, Monocle Radio, thank you very much for joining us. That's all the time we have for this edition of The Briefing. It was produced by Monica Lillis. Our researcher was Daniela Bra-Smith and our studio manager was Elliot Greenfield. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Chris Turmack. Have a great weekend, everyone. Goodbye, and thanks for listening.